So today I'm going to talk about this text called the Sutra on Mindfulness of Inhalation and Exhalation. In Chinese, we say Anban Shouyi Jing. This is the missing link between the original Anapanasati Sutta in the Buddha, in the original teachings of the Buddha, and all the way through the foundations of the Zen practice in Japan. So this text is very important. This text actually was, we call it a new meditation, because it was originally done in the year 148 CE is when it was translated into Chinese. We don't have the original text in Sanskrit. We don't know what happened to it. But the reason that we say it's a new technique is because the original technique was part of a text that had many commentaries, and the commentaries were infused inside of the text, and you couldn't tell what was the text and what was the commentary. So the name of that text was called the Da'anban Shouyi Jing, the Great Sutra on Mindfulness of Inhalation and Exhalation. In 1999, a clean version of the text was found in a temple in Japan. And so it didn't have any of the commentaries. We call that Anban Shouyi Jing, just the regular. And then in 2008, and since then, there have been some releases of some translations from the text. But this is a very difficult text to translate because it was written in Han Dynasty Chinese. And I could give you some examples of some of the terms in Chinese that were very difficult to translate. And even someone who has some familiarization with Tang Dynasty Chinese, when you look at the Han Dynasty Chinese, the terms are different, let alone modern Chinese. Tang Dynasty Chinese starting around the 6th, 7th century. But this is 2nd century. So you can see there are some difficulties. But we now have some ability to be able to see this connection. So in the original Anapanasati Sutta, people think, oh, I'm practicing mindfulness of breathing when I'm doing Anapanasati. But Anapanasati is actually made up of 4 tetrads. You can go to the next slide with the different tetrads. The different tetrads have require, by the time you get to the 2nd tetrad, already you're advanced. So most people, when we're practicing, we're just practicing the 1st tetrad for beginners. We're breathing in long, breathing in short, sensitive to the entire body, and calming the bodily formation of the breath. So this is what most people are doing when they say, I'm practicing mindfulness of the breath. I'm just noticing my breathing. If I breathe long, it's okay. If I breathe short, it's okay. When you focus on your breathing, you can tell how it is that you're feeling. What is the mind doing? How are we doing? If I'm anxious, maybe my breathing is different. If I'm depressed, my breathing is different. If I'm excited, my breathing is different. I become aware of the changes in my breathing based on what it is that's going on. So here I want to calm my breathing, calm the mind. This is the practice of the 1st tetrad of Anapanasati. Okay, this is good. And so there's an original formula to start this that I led you in today. Sending the awareness to the breath, ardent, alert, mindful, putting aside our wants and worries about the daily life, and then the first part of the Anapanasati. The Sutra on Mindfulness of Inhalation and Exhalation, it's translated that way. Anban really here is a transliteration of anapana, the breathing. Anapana in Pali means inhale, exhale, breathing. And sho means to keep or maintain, and yi is the mentation here, referring to mindfulness. In Jing is the sutra discourse. So this discourse is so important because we find this same technique as a link in a chain from a number of different very important teachings. So one of the great translators in the 400s, the beginning of the 5th century, named Kumra Jiva, you may have heard of him, maybe not, very important. He translated a text called the Sutra on the concentration of sitting meditation. The Zochan Sanmei Jing. This text became very important. It was translated in the year 401. This text contains the very same method as the one that was translated in 148. Also, the sutra that was written by Vasubandhu, the Amidhamma Kosha Asya. This is a foundational text of the Yogacara school. You may not know all of the references, but I'm saying these are some of the major texts that were written on meditation. Uses the same method. In the sutra that was written by Buddhaghosa, he is the great teacher who put together Theravadan Buddhism. See, Theravadan Buddhism very popular in Southeast Asia. The text called the Visuddhimagga, the Path of Purification, uses the same methodology. A few extra steps, but basically the same. And we can see here in the Buddhaghosa text that I've provided for you here for those people who need, I think I'm an old professor. I have to give citations. You know, if you teach at Washington University, the students will challenge you and say, oh, professor, do you have a reference on that? Are you just making it up? So here we have the original Pali and also the Chinese going through all of the different stages. Here he has 8 stages. That's not enough. We know that further into the Tang Dynasty, the great Tenjai master, his name Master Zhi Yi, also considered a great master in the Chan tradition. Our tradition, Chan, also leading into Zen. He also had a text called the 6 Sublime Dharma Gates, Yu Miao Fa Man. And this text also goes through the same stages of breathing. So we know this must be a very important method because all of these great teachers are using them. And then we find that when we go to the Zen monastery now in Japan and the Zen teachers here in the United States, what are they teaching? They're teaching the same method, except they're just teaching really for what I found is they're only teaching the first 2 parts, the counting and the following. The counting, actually, Dogen, who was a very important teacher of the Soto school, he was not a big fan of counting. Personally, not so much for myself either. I use a different technique of the Sarvastivadin school. But Dogen, his student, Kaizan, he was a big fan of the counting, and Dogen was more teaching what's called Shikan Taza, which is just sitting. It means following, just following the breath. That's a lecture in and of itself as to the meaning of these terms. But we can see that Zen uses this as a foundational technique. So how did this come to be? Well, there was a great translator. His name was Anshigao. One of the very first translators, one of the first people to bring the original Buddhist teachings to China. There was a legend about an emperor who had a dream, and in the dream he saw a person with golden light coming out of their mind. And when he woke up, he told his advisors, "What's this about?" And they said, "Oh, there's a great teacher in India, and this is who you saw in your dream." So the emperor said, "Oh, we need to dispatch people to go find out about this." So he sent emissaries towards India, but on the way, they ran into two men on white horses who had a few texts, and they invited them to the capital at that time, Luoyang, and he met with the emperor, and the emperor said, "This is wonderful, and we're going to build a temple called the White Horse Temple, Bai Master Temple." It's still there today, but we don't know if it's a true story, maybe a legend. But the first person that we know is a real translator. His name is Anshigao, and he was the one who translated this text from the missing Sanskrit text into Chinese. So these two versions of the text exist: the original version that has all of the commentaries, the Da Anban Shou Yi Jing, and then the second version, the Anban Shou Yi Jing, that was found in 1999 in the temple. So this one is called the Congo G manuscript, or the K manuscript. So it's usually by the scholars referred to K hyphen ABSYJ. So there are four main parts to the method. One is to practice with the breath and the five aggregates. That's what we did today. The second is to practice with the breath. The first part is just practicing with the breath. The second part is practicing with the breath and the five aggregates. The third part is to practice with what's called the 37 prerequisites for the attainment of enlightenment. And you can well understand that this must be very advanced, and it is. And then practicing with psychological types and antidotes, more direct. So, next slide, we see the translation of the 6 parts: counting, following, stopping, observing, returning, and purifying. We see it from the Da Anban Shou Yi Jing. T is for the Taisho, that's the catalog number. And then we have the K version, the shorter version. And you can see that there's a little bit of difference between the Chinese, but not much. So if you go to the next slide, we see that the counting is the counting of the breaths from 1 to 10. And following is just focusing on the sensation of the breathing. And the stopping is the letting go of the discursive thought. So let me just say a few words. In the Yogacara system, as I had talked about this last time in our study group, there are 3 levels of thinking. One level of thinking is the thinking that we use when we're walking around the world. We call discriminating thinking, because we have to know the difference between the floor and the table and the platform. And when you're driving, you need to know the difference between the road and a tree. You need to recognize what it is that you're doing at work. Well, this is my job. This is TikTok. I stay with my job and not on TikTok. You discriminate between things. That's very important. You need discriminating thinking. to negotiate the world. But when you're sitting in meditation, your eyes are either closed or close to closed, and you don't need so much of this discriminating thinking. You can close down the sense doors, some of them, to some degree. The ears actually stay pretty open, but we don't alert ourselves to the normal sound around us. The smell and taste, the same thing. We don't become absorbed in those things. We don't need it. Then what we're left with is this chattering mind. In Sanskrit and, well, in Pali, the word is papancha, the proliferating of ideas and thoughts and storylines. And usually, who's in the storyline? The self. Usually the main character. And everything else goes around and around that. We call it discursive or drama, rama, around the self. So you're sitting there and you say, oh, I'm stopping everything, no more sense data. And suddenly the mind is just chattering away. And the instruction is, oh, let go of this chatter in the mind, the monkey mind, let go of it. Puppy brain, let go of it. Oh, this is very hard. This is called stopping. How do we stop that? So we need to learn the method of how to do it, and the only way to learn the method is to do the homework, to practice. So we practice again and again. We try the different method until finally this becomes a little more quiet, quieter, and then maybe very quiet. And as soon as it gets very quiet, the ego jumps up and says, oh, I did it. More chatter. Or you don't do it, and then you have this thought in there that says, oh, I'm not doing it right, I'm not good at this, I'll never do it. That's a lot of chatter, a lot of commentary. Eventually, we overcome that. And that's when the practice of the 5 aggregates begins. So this requires, again, training in understanding the Buddha's way of looking at sentience, about what it means to be a conscious human being, to understand what that means, or any kind of conscious being at all. And we begin to understand what we're made up of. And we begin to deconstruct that in a way as we're breathing. We become aware of these things and we see how it is that the mind wants to latch onto that and say, oh, my body is my identity. I have this wonderful body. Oh, so handsome, beautiful, young. Or my body old, falling apart. No one wants to look at me. All of that attachment to the vanity of the body. And then the feelings in the body, the same thing. The mind wants to attach to those feelings and say, oh, okay, I don't want to attach to the body, I'll attach to the feeling. Let me see if I can get more and more pleasurable feelings in my body. When that doesn't work, they say, okay, well, maybe I need to have different perceptions and thoughts. The mind wants to attach to that. And so on and so forth, until finally we're so exhausted. The self, we become exhausted by it. And then we can observe purely and not attach. So that's that part of the observation. Now, returning, this is, I have to confess that I need help with this understanding of returning. I only have a little bit of understanding of this. I asked Master to translate a section of this for me, and he did, and it was very helpful. I got more confused. Thank you. So I did my best. Purifying, not so hard. Purifying, I know the 5 hindrances. I know we want to let go of the 5 hindrances. When we let go of that, then we can enter into the higher levels of concentration. Then that's the anapanasati of the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th tetrads. It's okay. I understand that part. I've gone off script here.
Oh, you're fine. I think I'm up, kept it.
Yeah. So I have extra slides here, and I have the Chinese in the slides and a little bit of explanation of these things. But basically, I wanted to share this with you today. And, you know, I have a whole other set of slides on the 37 prerequisites, but I don't want to cause more distress. So I think that it's better to kind of leave this to our understanding today and realize how important this technique is. And then this talk and the meditation will be uploaded to the MABA site and also to my YouTube channel, so people who want to practice using this can do so. I think the first 3 parts particularly are very helpful. Learning to do the counting. As I say, I don't use the counting myself. I like the technique of the Sarvastivadin, where we do arising, abiding, changing, and ceasing. That technique's also on my YouTube channel. The reason I like that is because every experience that we have, it comes up, it sticks around for a while, it changes, and then it stops. And it's very similar to the technique of the Theravadan school, except they really just emphasize the rising and ceasing. So Vasubandhu also practiced this part as well. So I don't see a whole lot of, for myself, counting doesn't help me to understand the impermanence of going through the cycle of arising, abiding, changing, and ceasing, as well as that technique does. But this is just my own practice. I don't want to criticize Ansha Gao, who might come back and haunt us. But I think the following and the stopping, observing, very, very important. Understanding the 5 aggregates, very important. This is the thing that really differentiates Buddhism from so many of the other meditation techniques, because there are many meditation techniques. People come to see me who do meditation from other practices, not just the Eastern practices, Hindu. I have people who come to talk to me about the Hindu meditation, and people who come to see me about the meditation from the Ignatian school. Very good meditations that they have there. But what's different in the Buddhist technique is this understanding of the 5 aggregates. This is something very, very important, special in the Buddhist teachings. So I made 50 slides. I think I used 10. That's a good sign.
Use 22.
So I want to thank you all for your kind attention today.